Now available in paperback and e-readers. Spellbound, a darker shade of black. Get your copy today at your favorite online bookseller. I'm really starting to understand why nothing changes in terms of quality regarding DC Comics film and television properties. And the reason why nothing changes in terms of quality for DC Comics film and television properties is because DC Comics fans will pretty much settle for anything without having any sort of standard for quality. And because they don't have a standard for quality, they're willing to settle for less. And an example of settling for less is the response to the recent CW Heroes vs. Aliens event. Now, when we look at this Heroes vs. Aliens event, and you look at it objectively, you clearly see it's one of the worst things ever produced as it relates to superhero properties. This Heroes vs. Aliens event was supposed to be a 4-night television crossover event between CW's Supergirl, The Flash, Arrow, and Legends of Tomorrow. Unfortunately, when you look at this event from an objective perspective, you see how dysfunctional it was, how disorganized it was, and how jumbled it was. But to many DC Comics fans, they sat there and tried to make justifications for this event, saying that it was a good event. And it clearly, to me, as a professional writer with 20 years of experience and a background in fantasy, looking at it and saying, this was one of the worst things I ever saw. You know, when I looked at this event, the structure of the story was jumbled and inconsistent. Even the characterizations were inconsistent. But to the DC Comics fan, they were willing to settle for substandard as their standard. And this has been proven in a consistent pattern when we look at how well the recent Suicide Squad movie performed. The recent Suicide Squad movie, made hundreds of millions of dollars because DC Comics fans were willing to settle for substandard as their standard. But I'm going to talk about why this Heroes vs. Aliens event was even lowered the bar further down from Suicide Squad, which was already a low bar as it was. Now, when we look at this Heroes vs. Aliens event, it's clearly started off on the wrong foot with that Supergirl episode. Now, on this Supergirl episode, you would think they would have, established a shot of Barry Allen being in the beginning and running into these aliens, and then talking about how he needed Supergirl's help to deal with these aliens. If this is a crossover event, and he wants to and put some scenes in there talking about how he needed to go to this other Earth to get help because he didn't have any heroes to help him deal with the threat. Instead of establishing that in that early episode of Supergirl, what they did was just give us a regular episode of Supergirl, and then at the end show us Barry Allen coming in saying that he needed her help. And that was not the foot to start off a crossover with. When you start off a crossover, you want to establish the main characters and what they want and why we should care. That's basic screenwriting 101. You have to establish the characters, you have to establish the story, and you have to do that within the first 10 minutes. And that wasn't done in this crossover. Instead, they let a regular episode of Supergirl run and then tack that on at the end, and we're supposed to believe that's a crossover. I'm sorry, but in any professional screenwriting class or any professional screenwriting guild or any sort of professional production company, that would be considered unacceptable. However, DC Comics fans took that as acceptable. Again, showing us how substandard is the standard for DC Comics properties. And then we cross over to the Flash episode, which was nothing more than a bunch of exposition, a little mind control popped in, and then heroes fighting heroes. Again, no establishment of the aliens as a threat or why we should care about the aliens. Tacked on, pasted on, and then at the end of the episode, we get Team Arrow beamed up onto a spaceship, and after that, we get a episode of Batman the Animated Series cut and pasted into an episode of Arrow, and that's supposed to be great writing. And then after they break out of the dream sequence, they go find a spaceship, float over, and then there's a Deus Ex Machina of the Wave Rider coming in to save Team Arrow because they don't know how to fly a ship. Again, bad writing 101, but this is okay for the DC Comics fan. And the DC Comics fan what's so sad about the DC Comics fan is that they're willing, again, to settle for substandard as their standard because they're so desperate to see any image of a DC Comics property that they're willing to settle for less instead of demanding better of Warner Brothers. Because if they demanded better of Warner Brothers, I believe they would get better quality. Because it's clear to me from watching episodes of Supergirl and early episodes of Flash and season 5 of Arrow that Berlanti Productions can produce quality products if they want to. Because I look at earlier episodes of season 1 Supergirl and even season 2 Supergirl, like the one with Tyler Hoechlin's Superman, it's clear to me they can produce, high quality stories. But because there is no standard and there's no demand for a standard from the comic fans and even Berlanti Productions themselves at the top to say, look, this has to meet a consistent standard for quality, they slack off and give you junk instead of giving you the best. Because it's clear to me that they're capable of doing this, but because the DC Comics fan is willing to settle for less and say, this is good, they wind up getting stuff that really is not up to par. And when I look at this crossover event, it's clear to me that DC Comics fans, are settling for less because this was not their best. I can pretty much point to that Superman introduction and show you what good is, because that introduction of Superman on Supergirl season 2, that was well done. The introduction of these outsiders and the new Team Arrow, that was well done. And earlier episodes of The Flash, those were well done. Not season 3, because season 3 has been a pile of crap, but they are capable of producing quality work and meeting a standard. But because DC Comics fans settle for less, they wind up getting less than the best. And this is why, DC is continuing to go further back and not being able to compete with Marvel Studios. Because we look at Marvel Studios, and even in their Netflix television division, there's a consistent standard for quality. We can look at all 13 episodes of Daredevil Season 2 and all 13 episodes of Luke Cage and Daredevil Season 1, and we see a consistent bar for quality because Kevin Feige pretty much and the producers of the Netflix series set a bar for standards. And they pretty much want to keep the characters consistent from the movies to the Netflix series, and even with the whole Marvel Studios brand, everything is consistent with the source material and the spirit of the source material, consistent with the characterizations, and consistent in the stories. And that consistency is because they have a standard for quality. They have a bar for what is going to be a Marvel Studios project and a Marvel product. And because they have that high bar, they are able to produce consistently quality products. And this is the big problem with DC Comics and DC Comics things, because that nobody demands better. It's like the fans don't demand better, the producers don't demand better, and that's why your products are consistent, but they're consistently bad or consistently mediocre, and rarely do we get the occasional good product. In order to get consistency, you have to have a standard and a bar that has to be met, and that I'm not seeing that with Berlanti Productions, nor am I seeing it with the DC Comics films as it relates to the studio. And it's sad because this could have been a nicely competitive race between the two companies, and they could have been producing some of the best superhero properties out here. But when I look at it now, it's just a one-sided thing because DC's and Warner Brothers refuse to establish a standard for their characters, and that's mainly because they just see their characters as properties. They don't see them, as something important and that with stories, and they don't value them enough to go out here and produce the best quality products possible for the fans. And then because the fans are willing to settle for whatever is given to them, they never get the best because they're always settling for less. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.